Hi, this is Space, and today I will be talking about Rogue Wizards, a roguelike game that was recently released by Spellbind Studios. Rogue Wizards is set in a fantasy world divided up between two types of people, the Elam and the Banlets. The Elam are the ruling class and they can use magic. However, one day the Elam's magical power started weakening and the Banlets became capable of magic. A lunatic seized control of the Wizards Guild and started opening rifts all over the world. This means it's up to you, as a bandit who is newly capable of magic, to strike back from a hidden village, closing rifts, defeating the guild masters, and eventually toppling the madman himself. On your adventures through the randomly generated dungeons, you will regularly encounter allies who join the village and open up a shop or service that you can use after every completed adventure. One guy sells weapons, one enchants items, one stores your stuff for you. You can also find items to upgrade most of the services, although upgrade is a fairly nebulous term, as it mostly seems to shuffle the stock with some that's a slightly higher level. Being that gear is heavily randomized, that doesn't really promise it will be any better. The story mode is your typical linear progression. Go to the dungeon for that quest type, with a central hub of merchants to sell your loot and restock on potions. Then it also has the actual roguelike game mode called Gauntlet. You start in a dungeon at level 1 with only a sword and potions, and you keep going through the floors collecting loot and leveling up as you go. And then every X amount of floors there's a boss who is a higher level than you, and his character drops some good loot when killed. The enemies are pretty well designed. There aren't too many of them, but they've all got at least one individual quirk. For example, one shoots allies while another covers the ground with ice, causing you to go sliding all over the place. One hurls out eggs that if left unattended will hatch into more enemies. They've all got some ability that makes them unique. Magic, leveling, and equipment are all a bit like Diablo 2. On leveling up you get some points to assign to stats and some points to assign to spells. Each of the 6 magic schools offers 3 spells, with each new spell becoming available every 10 levels, and they're not simply flat upgrades on the previous. One nature spell teleports you in a random direction and heals you, while another summons a bunch of spirits that shoot off like bullets at the nearest enemy once per turn. Magic is somewhat limited by the fact that spellcasts cost reagents, and those same reagents are used in the occasional cauldrons to craft healing potions. The idea is that you need to balance out your spell usage and limit it to when you really need it, with the rest of your combat focused on your weapons. All weapons fall into broad categories: bows, swords, wands, and so on, with each category generally containing a couple of weapons, each of which behaves differently. Equipment also has enchantments and occasionally sockets into which gems can be slotted to improve stats in a particular way. And yes, you will get lots and lots of pieces of gear, with each dungeon run usually offering up to a couple of dozens you can either swap in or sell to vendors later. There isn't a great deal else to do in Rogue Wizards, other than going into dungeons, beating up monsters, getting better gear, selling stuff to vendors, leveling up as you wish, and then repeating. There aren't really any other quirks. You simply stroll through corridors, punching monsters and grabbing loot. Even though it doesn't seem so at first, Rogue Wizards is really slow. Walk into a room with multiple enemies and you'll be sat there for quite some time, while all of the movements and attacks animations play out. In a game that's almost entirely based around goblin punching, it's probably a bad sign if I'm sighing when I see a lot of enemies appear. And considering you get a massive amount of bonus experience for opening old chests and killing monsters on the floor, this isn't something that's easily avoided, because grinding through every room in the dungeon is pretty much the best way to progress. You can carry a maximum of 5 health potions with you, all of which instantly heal you and your party to full health. And not only that, but the reagents used to make them are common, especially if you're not using many fire spells. Potions themselves are very cheap from vendors either way. You can normally survive multiple rooms full of foes without much of a problem even without them, because most weapons and spells are obscenely powerful. AI monsters will happily attack a barrel sitting next to them rather than moving towards you, and you are far more powerful than any single monster you'll ever encounter, with the possible exception of bosses. But boss AI is also easily exploited, or you can just use spells they're weak to in order to shred their health. You get ample warnings to what your elemental alignment is before going anywhere near their dungeons, so it's very unlikely that you will be caught unaware. Even though I haven't played anything outside the main mode, I can say that after a little trial and error, it was quite easy to learn the yeses and nos of the game. And this is not the game I would recommend for getting a bit of excitement or adrenaline rush. This is more of a wind down game. There's also a pretty cool system for your gear where every piece will have a rank, which goes up by using that piece. For example, a weapon rank goes up by killing things with it, and every time you go up a rank, it rolls a new affix on that weapon, which can be the damage or another random property. So your common drop can actually be better than a rare drop if you have used it more. You get bonus XP if you kill every enemy and open every chest on the floor, and you can use the map to teleport to various waypoints easily. You need keys to open chests, but those keys drop randomly from enemies, so if you find a chest and don't have a key, you can always go back to it later on. And from my experience, you always get enough keys for all the chests. We go on to some pros and cons that I've come up with after playing this game. Some of the pros are that personally I really like the art style of this game, and this is purely subjective. I think the characters' design is awesome, and I kind of like how the tiles are created as you go, because this kind of gives you an element of surprise. I also think that the loot mechanic is very good because you are constantly picking up new weapons and gear, and they often have interesting enchantments that make choosing items about more than just damage and defense value. On a similar note, the fact that gear levels up as you use it, gaining an extra enchantment when it does so, is a very nice touch. This encourages you to specialize, as well as adds another level to the decision as to whether or not to constantly swap out gear. When it comes to cons, I have two of them. First one is that the combat is pretty easy, to a point where it gets boring very quickly. Even fighting 4 or 5 enemies at once is not really a threat, because they do so little damage and generally die from 1 or 2 hits. If you got a companion or a pet, it gets even easier. My second con is that the combat is really slow. You always have to wait out for the battle animations to play out, and when there are about 5 or 6 enemies and you have some companions as well, this can take really long. For a game that is primarily focused on dungeon grinding, these flaws are enough to kill the game. All in all, it's a fun time killer with some good ideas from games you've probably played before and an interesting art style. If you're looking for something to pass the time, this is probably the game that will do just that. From what I could tell, it didn't have too many bugs, if any bugs at all, so it's not so bad. So this is the end of my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this one. Thanks for watching.